Almost all the important breakthrough ideas did not happen alone in the lab in front of the microscope. They happened at the conference table when everybody got together and shared their kind of latest findings. The spaces that have historically led to innovation tend to look like this. This is the kind of chaotic environment where ideas were likely to come together. So if we're trying to build organizations that are more innovative, we have to build spaces that look a little bit more like this. This is what your office should look like.
Stephen Johnson.
Stephen Johnson.
Stephen Johnson.
Stephen Johnson.
I'm Stephen Johnson. A couple years ago, I wrote a book called Where Good Ideas Come From. Why do certain people end up producing disproportionately creative ideas? It examined everything from Gutenberg's printing press to Darwin's theory of evolution, all the way to modern inventors at Microsoft. And I looked in that book to see if there were patterns of innovation that all these different creators shared that we could learn from. And so now
I've been on this quest to investigate this question of where good ideas come from. What are the environments that lead to unusual levels of innovation?
We can all recognize a good idea when we see one, but where do these ideas really come from? In this video, I will show you how good ideas are created, diffused, and adopted, and how you can promote an environment where good ideas flourish with 7 patterns that create revolutionary ideas. I'm Nicola Domanin, welcome to my channel. A series of properties and patterns across history seems to give us some clues as to how revolutionary inventions were conceptualized. Innovative thinking isn't just about luck and chances.
Are there recurring patterns that we can learn from, that we can take and kind of apply to our own lives or our own organizations, our own environments, to make them more creative and innovative?
So you need to think of ideas as an interconnected network, a bricolage of messy pieces that become connected only when nurtured with time and knowledge. In this environment, we take all the ideas we inherited and we mold them all together with new hunches we stumble upon to form new ideas, in a process that happens gradually.
They're cobbled together from whatever parts that happen to be around nearby. We take ideas from other people, from people we've learned from people we run into in the coffee shop, and we stitch them together into new forms and we create something new. That's really where innovation happens.
If we take the sunflower as an example, its atomic elements were present on Earth long before any life existed. But you couldn't spontaneously grow a sunflower in that environment because it was missing many subsequent innovations like chloroplasts to capture the sun energy, or the vascular tissues to distribute the resources, or the DNA molecules to be able to reproduce. So each innovation is contained within the limits and the potential of its own environment, which is called the adjacent possible. That means that at any time we are capable of extraordinary change, but that change is only confined in the boundaries of the adjacent possible. So as we explore this boundary and we keep adding new knowledge, it creates more possible combinations that couldn't have been obtained if we were missing some information. So the first pattern to good ideas is that good ideas come from our private adjacent possible that we continue to grow by learning and exploring new areas. So if we want to have a breakthrough, for example in the cure of diabetes, we need to have interest in adjacent realms such as microbiology or nutritional sciences. So all the knowledge and information that we acquire then becomes a spare piece that we can reutilize and repurpose to form new ideas. But one condition of this network of information is that it must be plastic, so that it can be remodeled and reprogrammed as we see fit. Think of it as if it were your brain. All these neurons are always interconnected, processing information by firing electrical signals in a certain sequence.
An idea is a network on the most elemental level. This is what is happening inside your brain. A new idea is a new network of neurons firing in sync with each other inside your brain. It's a new configuration that has never formed before, right?
But that brain that creates a certain idea behaves differently from a brain that is performing an ordinary task, in that the neurons continuously fire in a different sequence.
And the question is, how do you get your brain into environments where these new networks are going to be more likely to form?
So to have our brain remain in a creative state, it must be placed in an environment that shares the same firing sequences, which is a place where the randomized collisions between all the elements is encouraged. For example, like in a crowded city, If we do, in fact, take for example the city, some studies by the University of Toronto show that a close correlation exists between densely populated settlements and the dramatic surge of innovation rate in society. If you want to read a bit more on this subject, I will link both the studies and publication here in the description.
In fact, the spaces that have historically led to innovation tend to look like this. This is the kind of chaotic environment where ideas were likely to come together, where people are likely to have kind of new, interesting, unpredictable collisions, people from different backgrounds. So if we're trying to build organizations that are more innovative, we have to build spaces that, strangely enough, look a little bit more like this. This is what your office should look like.
So as we said, the highly dense and populated networks are the second pattern, not only because they make it easy for information to flow, but they serve the essential function of storing the innovation so it can be reused and repurposed instead of lost. In the 1990s, a psychologist named Kevin Dunbar began conducting research on some researchers at a molecular biology lab.
A wonderful researcher named Kevin Dunbar, he went to a bunch of science labs around the world and videotaped everyone and tried to figure out where the most important ideas, where they happened.
His most striking discovery had to do with the physical location where most of the innovative breakthroughs occurred. It turns out that the ground zero of innovation was not the microscope, but the conference table where the researchers would gather and informally discuss their latest work. It means that human contact and feedback remains to this day the most productive way to generate new ideas. Because when we are questioned, we are forced to think through problems and ideas we encountered from different perspectives and different scales. And this also allows for the sharing of hunches, meaning half-baked ideas. An idea which is only partial and incomplete, that might only need a really small missing element which might be located somewhere else, often as a hunch living in another person's head.
Is to allow those hunches to connect with other people's hunches. That's what often happens. You have half of an idea, somebody else has the other half, and if you're in the right environment, they turn into something larger than the sum of their parts.
So whilst hunches often die alone in environments where they're not allowed to form new connection to other ideas, hunches are allowed to collide, often, with other hunches in highly dense and populated networks. And this is the third pattern of creating new ideas: slow hunches that remain alive and unfold over long periods of time.
But in fact, if you go back and look at the historical record, it turns out that a lot of important ideas have very long incubation periods. I call this the slow hunch. A lot of great ideas linger on, sometimes for decades, in the back of people's minds. They have a feeling that there's an interesting problem, but they don't quite have the tools yet to discover them.
They start as vague and hard to describe feeling that a solution to a problem might exist, but it hasn't been created yet, and it lingers in the shadow of the mind whilst making new connections and strengthening over time, until they become complete and they sprout like a sudden new idea. And since hunches need a really long time to fully form, many brilliant people in the 18th, 19th and 20th century have left proof of the collection of their hunches in diaries and personal notebooks where ideas were clearly explained but left incomplete. For example, if you were to pick up Leonardo da Vinci's notebook, you would find sketches and wonders that remained incomplete for hundreds of years. And not all of these hunches happen while we are awake, because while we sleep, during the REM phase, our brain continues to fire signals at random, facilitating the formation of novel combinations. This is because the brain cells have a constant need for this chaos, through controlled bursts of random electrical signals. Even natural selection itself rewards innovation and adaptability of chaos. We evolved through millennia because if we were asexual, like plants, and we cloned our DNA instead of reproducing, our species would be susceptible to bacteria that could evolve to target the human genome as its primary target. A remarkable example of this is the flea Daphnia, which is a planktonic crustacean that turns asexual during calm and comfortable times, but during winter starts reproducing males for sexual reproduction to improve the chances of survival of the species through randomized DNA creation passed to the offspring. This element of randomness and chaos is called serendipity, and it is the fourth pattern for creating ideas. Think of serendipity as scrolling through a library and pulling down a book to read just because you found an intriguing cover. And this book will lead you to unplanned discoveries. So serendipity can be cultivated by removing yourself from the daily routine and just taking some time for yourself to think, reading multiple subjects, looking through your notes, and utilizing technology to promote random connections, just like Wikipedia creates connections of different subjects. Because in some rare occurrences, the error itself can turn into a great invention. If you think about it, it makes sense that the number of well-founded discoveries should be proportional to the number of wrong guesses, meaning the more productive you are, the more errors you make, and therefore the more likely you are to succeed. And this is not only because errors push you outside the realm of your comfortable assumptions and expectations, but because they force you to think through things and explore different alternatives. So we often disregard errors, but when errors can transform into insights, that is when we add new items to our adjacent possible, and we can conceptualize scenarios where these errors can be meaningful and they can create a breakthrough. And some experiments proved exactly that. By questioning a group of subjects, a study conducted at the University of Auckland proved that creativity was higher overall in groups where error was introduced, or that the subjects could point the mistakes out. This could be because errors naturally force us to think instead of automatically assuming outcomes. And the fifth pattern of good ideas is that ideas and creativities are more likely to emerge from environments with a certain margin of error and noise. Just like cells increase their margin of entropy when facing hostile environments to force cells to mutate and pressure them into surviving with less energy. But not all innovations start from scratch and then are built over time. History has taught us that only a small part of innovation is generated from the conceiving of new technologies from scratch. Most of the time, mature ideas are borrowed and reutilized in different fields altogether, especially in environments where the resources are scarce. Think of how some South African entrepreneurs exploited the durability of tires to create sleepers out of recycled waste. This phenomenon of borrowing ideas and resources is known as exaptation. Exaptation is rendered possible through the sharing and the spillover of ideas from different areas. And it is exponential when individuals have a wide network of connection that extend beyond their organization and beyond their field of expertise. That's because you can borrow from other disciplines that would otherwise not be accessible because of lack of competence. So when ideas from all different spaces can emerge, they begin quasi-autonomously to make sense to one another, leading to the emergence of a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Just like if you were to combine a lot of different mechanical gears, you can actually create a watch that counts time. And this is pattern number 6, that you can cultivate insights across multiple disciplines with the use of unbound curiosity and just by picking up a lot of new hobbies. And this actually reminds me of the speech that Steve Jobs gave in 2005 at Stanford University, where he said,
"What I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them. If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards.
And just like the Macintosh was born on top of pre-existing technologies such as monitors, microchips, electronics, keyboards, the creation of most innovations is extremely accelerated when they are built on top of platforms that effectively change the surrounding ecosystem. In such platforms, the collisions happen more often, and the good ideas can flourish because multiple disciplines are allowed to flow unchecked, and they can be recycled in any possible way imaginable. Take the example of one of the most popular applications that we use today, that you're using right now, that by combining the web, JavaScript, and Adobe Flash Player, all things that were already existent in the adjacent possible of many people, it allowed for the creation of YouTube, which was a revolutionary platform. And YouTube did not concoct from scratch a new standard for videos, so the last pattern is how these platforms can promote the recycling of architecture, just like the South American man didn't have to reinvent polyester, nylon and rubber, but could still use this platform to produce wearables. So it is not actually competition that drives the process of growth, as it is often believed, but rather the inventive collaboration that is promoted by the density that allows ecosystem engineering and recycling of ideas. And this is clearly remarked by the human history, which experienced a mass migration from individual breakthroughs to the creative insights of the group, starting from the 1800s, when people collectively began moving and living in large cities. So at this stage, most key technology that powered the industrial age and forward could be defined as collective inventions, just like the creation of the light bulb is attributed to Thomas Edison, Humphrey David, or Joseph Swan, when in reality they all contributed to its creation. You only need to look at nature, for example coral reefs and rainforests, to understand that while competition is abundant in those areas, what makes these environments so prosperous is the fact that organisms that live inside it can borrow each other's work, which is the ultimate explanation of the Darwin paradox that Charles encountered when studying coral reefs. And just like the coral reefs, the web and the cities are platforms too. They serve as a common place that belongs to everyone, where ideas collide, can emerge and recombine, so disciplines are allowed to borrow from one another. These platforms are spaces that have long supported innovation, from the first Mesopotamian settlement to today's invisible layers that populate the web. If we really want to promote good ideas, all we must do is create comparable environments on the scale of our everyday life. In the workplace, in the way we consume media, in the way we learn, and in the way we take notes. So to recap, if you really want to form good ideas, you have to get more spare parts to enter into your adjacent possible, by learning as much as possible from as many as different subjects as possible. We need to connect to wide and dense networks and groups where the information can flow unrestricted and abundant, and where your ideas can be challenged and tested from different perspectives. Number 3, you need to hold a personal notebook and you need to impress all of your hunches permanently in writing, where they can be picked up again later on and where you let them grow in the back of your mind. Number 4, you need to take a break and get some time off to think and promote serendipity by cross-referencing the thought and hunches you encounter with the hunches that you learn or that you wrote down. And you can utilize technologies like the internet to learn in a more randomized way and occasionally backing up in pleasant surprises. Number 5, you need to make generative mistakes. You need to introduce a little margin of error and you need to be open to questioning your mistakes. You need to fail more often to have more success. And you do not need to assume your outcome, but always try to conceptualize meaningful alternative scenarios. Number 6, increase the spillover of ideas. Exchange information with other people outside your sphere of competence. Be curious, borrow ideas, and take on multiple hobbies across different disciplines. And number 7, spend more time on open platforms and experiment with them. Allow yourself to enter in contact with informational hubs where the information can flow freely, like coffee houses and other liquid networks on the internet. So not only are these the best ways to set yourself up for conceptualizing new ideas, But this is how you yourself can control how broad the margin of your adjacent possible is, and now you can pick any subject and add it within your sphere of competence to borrow new perspectives from it. You have the power to exchange, debate, recycle hunches, and reutilize them in the best way you can conceptualize. So your mind is your own platform, and you have free reign over what ideas, thoughts, and hunches populate it. So make the best of it by becoming ingenious and imaginative. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember that you are not only your mind, but you are also your body as well. If you don't take care of yourself physically, your mind might not be able to fully take advantage of what your mind has to offer, which is why it is imperative that you understand the consequences that food you eat has on your body and how you have been eating wrong for your entire life. So click on this video to find out how glucose spikes harm you and how you can fix it by just changing the order of what you eat.